Hi, everybody. Mark here, Director of Education and Educational Therapist at ED Academics. Today's topic is executive functions. This video is designed for students towards developing their executive function skills. It's also designed for parents who want to learn how to support their kids with executive functions. It's also for teachers who want to implement executive function skills in the classroom. And honestly, for anyone who wants to learn about the theory and practice of executive function skills. So now we're going to take a deeper dive into the executive functions. We're going to be talking about the behavioral, cognitive, and social emotional skills in executive functioning. Along the way, we're going to be asking questions. We're going to be creating tools. And third, we're going to be modeling how to perform these executive functions. Okay. I call this the QTM model, right? It's a practical way to apply the conceptual skills and the theory behind executive functions. So when you go online and look for executive functions, there's tons of different infographics out there. Some of them have 15 skills, some of them have 10, some of them have 5. A lot of them don't even have the same language or the same words. A lot of times the words are overlapping and you're like, well, what does this mean? It's kind of a lot of stuff out there, very overwhelming. I'm going to be sharing with you an infographic that I found that I have found successful over the years. Here we go. One of the categories, as we discussed earlier on the executive functioning, are behavioral. Number 8, 7, and 6, organization, task initiation, and planning and prioritization are all overlapping yet distinct aspects of behaviors that we want to see in executive functioning. Things like planning and prioritizing. Which homework is due first? Okay, which one is going to be shorter or longer? Right? Task initiation. When do I have to start this to get this done before dinner time or before I go to sleep at night? Or maybe I have a study hall. Can I get this thing done? Organization. Where is the assignment? Is it online? Is it a worksheet? These types of things. Notice, I'm asking a lot of questions here. When I'm working with my students, I'm asking them questions. Where is your homework? It's a classic one. When are we going to get started on it? All right. Do you have the resources you need? Right. So I'm asking questions. Okay. Well, what are the tools that are available? Some people like to use planners, digital planners, physical planners. Some people like to have notepads, set alarms. There's all sorts of ways that we can create tools to help us develop the behavioral skills that we're talking about here. Finally, in the classroom, I'm modeling for my students how to make this happen. Oh, I don't know where my homework is, or I don't even know what it is. Well, where could I go? Right? Let me check the school website. Let me check my backpack. Let me check my notebook. In some cases, let me email my teacher. So I'm modeling this for my students. Okay, so here's what we're talking about where theory meets practice. The theory of executive functioning as it pertains to behavioral skills are all these to-do list types of things. Organization, task initiation, planning and prioritization. These are things that we want to behave a certain way in doing. It's our to-do list. We want to be asking questions. We want to be creating tools to do that. We also want to be modeling how to do it. That's the QTM again. Again, I know I'm repeating myself a lot, but this is what helps, repetition, the QTM model. Okay, so now we talked about the behavioral skills and executive functioning. Now we're going to get into the cognitive skills. Number 5, self-monitoring. Number 4, working memory. And number 3, flexible thinking are very much related to cognition. When I say cognition, I'm talking about thinking. What are we thinking about? Okay. What was the homework assignment that we did last week? What was the topic we were just working about? Okay. Okay. Um, the homework changed, or maybe there is something new on the test that we didn't know about. How are we going to adjust to that? How are we going to think through that process? Okay. Are we even retaining what the teacher is saying? How do we assess? How do we know? right? So these are the questions we want to ask. We want to do check-ins with our students. Hey, are you remembering what we were talking about? What were we just talking about? You don't want to put people on the spot, if you're a teacher or an educator, or even if you're a student, you don't want to put too much pressure on yourself to always remember, always remember. But ask yourself, what was the topic? Oh, it was the Socratic method by Plato, Socrates, right? What if there's something that is new that we have no idea about and we're confused about it? How do we know? How do we self-monitor? Right? What are the tools? We can ask questions to our teacher, you know? And and as teachers and educators and parents, we can model this for our kids. Hey, I can check in with myself. Okay, I really didn't understand the Socratic method. Let me ask my teacher again. Okay? So again, now we're seeing what are called the cognitive skills: self-monitoring, working memory, and flexible thinking. These are academic skills, but they're also life skills as we talked about. Okay, they're part of executive functioning. And a lot of times we talk about cognitive skills, 5, 4, and 3, and behavioral skills, 8, 7, and 6, as cognitive behavioral. There's a lot of psychological theories out there on cognitive behavioral skills and how they interact with each other and how they overlap. I find it useful to separate them, especially when I'm teaching them, because it can get kind of overwhelming and you don't even really know where to start. Well, what's more important, cognitive or behavioral? The truth is, they're all important, right? But we're breaking them down for us here, okay? Moving on to the next category. Okay, we're going to be talking about social and emotional learning. Number two, emotional control, and number one, impulse control. These are major, major, major things in the classroom. When we're talking about emotional control, what if we're anxious and overwhelmed and feeling dysregulated? How do we not blow up or have a meltdown or something like that? Right? Well, if you're working with someone, you see they're kind of getting a little bit stressed out. Hey, let's take a step back. The academics can wait. Let's take a deep breath. You know, you can check in. Are we doing okay? Do we need a break? Right? Remember, QTM, questioning, right? Are we doing okay? Should we take a break? Right? Give you the tools. Hey, you can always share with me if you need to take a break. You need to advocate, communicate for yourself. These types of things. We want to make sure we're not feeling stressed, anxious, and overwhelmed. And as educators, as teachers, and as students, we want to be able to have emotional control or develop our emotional control, a type of emotional resilience. Okay. This is definitely emotional learning. Okay. We also want to have impulse control, right? If we're really tired or we're really angry or something's going on outside of the classroom, we don't want to have a meltdown. We don't want to blow up. We don't want to be frustrated and start screaming and cursing and all this stuff. Well, maybe we do. It can be fun sometimes to let it out, right? But when we're talking about executive functioning, when we're talking about social emotional learning, impulse control is a huge part of it, right? Again, I know I keep saying it, but here at ED Academics, we understand that repetition and rehearsal are an important part of the learning. Um, Here, we're going to be really talking about the QTM model, right? We want to ask questions, we want to create tools, and we want to model. So these are the most important things to do because it's one thing to know about the concepts of social emotional learning and how they're related to emotional control and impulse control. It's one thing to understand the concept, but it's another thing to implement them into our lives, to rehearse them, to practice them. This is the important thing of where theory meets practice. Okay, so there we have it. That's called social emotional learning. Check-ins, lots and lots of check-ins. We just talked about all these different executive function skills. So there were 8 of them. I broke them down into different categories. I broke them down into behavioral, cognitive, and social emotional learning. But it's one thing to know the concepts. It's one thing to know the practice using the QTM model of questioning, tools, and modeling behaviors. But how do we really implement it into our lives? How do we really know if we're doing it? Okay, here comes a big buzzword. We call this metacognition. Metacognition is kind of an overarching executive function. Metacognition has a lot of definitions out there. Metacognition has a lot of different ways of being described. The way that I like to describe metacognition, okay, I read it in actually it was a textbook on teaching reading comprehension to elementary school kids. I thought it was very powerful. Okay. What is metacognition? It is the intellectual functioning of one's own mind. Okay? The intellectual functioning of one's own mind. Okay? And there's a second part to it too. And this is the really important part. Conscious efforts to monitor and control this functioning. I'll say it again. Conscious efforts to monitor and control this functioning. Metacognition is this idea that we're going to be checking in with ourselves. We're going to be checking in if we're uh, performing the correct behaviors. We're going to be thinking about things the right way or our social emotional behaviors. Okay. Again, it's one thing to know what these executive functions are, it's another thing to implement them into our lives. Right? So, again, metacognition, the intellectual functioning of one's own mind, the ability to think about your intellectual functioning, but moreover, your conscious efforts to control and monitor these functions. It's kind of a mouthful, I know. That's that's those are the concepts. Those are the theories. And I'm trying to break it down for y'all. So again, well, if someone says, well, how do you do that? How do you understand the intellectual functioning of your own mind? And how do you consciously monitor and control these functions? Well, those are the executive functions. Those are the skills we talked about. Those are the behavioral skills, the cognitive skills, and the social emotional skills we talked about. Those are the things we have to develop. And because we know what metacognition is, we're checking in to see if we're making progress with those. Well, how do we check in with that? Well, that's where the practice comes in. The questioning, the creating of the tools, and the modeling of the tools. Yeah, there you have it, folks. Okay, I hope you guys enjoyed that. It was a lot of fun for me to make that executive functioning video. I implement these skills in every single session at ED Academics. Doesn't matter if we're studying mathematics, English, science, ACT, philosophy, psychology, or just doing life skills, mentorship, or we're just focusing directly on executive functioning. Executive functioning is something that has to happen in school, in life, and often we overlook it as something that has to be taught. Sometimes we just think it comes along the way and we learn these skills just through school or through life. Well, I'm here to say that that doesn't always happen. Okay. And if you guys want to learn more about executive functions, reach out. Let me know. Talk to me on YouTube, Instagram, whatever, email, whatever method y'all want. Okay. Okay, guys, have fun, learn, grow, sapere out, dare to know. It's Mark here, Director of Education and Educational Therapist at ED Academics.